So we've still got people joining. We're going to just wait until seems like most of the people are in the room to begin, but I appreciate everyone's promptness. Those of you who joined right on the dot. I tend to be very Zen-like in my attitude towards time. It's not a very Tibetan Buddhist approach. But we'll wait for everyone to find the link and get on with us. Great to see you all.
Shall we get started, Tenzin? It seems like the numbers may have leveled off, or would you like to wait another minute
No,
or
let's
two?
go ahead and start. There may still be some latecomers, but they can catch up.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here at the second session of the Big Love Summit with Tenzin Chogkyi this evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, on Reclaiming Joy. The earlier session today I attended, and it was excellent, on love, presence, and embodiment, and I highly recommend viewing that when the recording is ready. So this summit, the Big Love Summit, is organized by FDCW to celebrate and share programs that help us develop our compassion, our ethics, and wisdom. And personally, I have benefited from many of the FDCW programs, including training in the 16 Guidelines for Life, and also this year's Compassion and Wisdom in Action webinar series. And there are courses offered on the FDCW website and recordings of the webinars if you'd like to check them out. So today we're together for just an hour. Tenzin will speak for about 40 minutes, and there will be a chance for questions at the end. If you have questions along the way, you can send them in the chat, but we won't be interrupting the talk to ask them. We'll try to ask them at the end. I will keep track of those. My name is Pamela Patton. I'm the Director of Pastoral Ministries, and I lead the Buddhism and Mindfulness program at All Souls Unitarian Congregation in New York City. And I see that some members of our Buddhism and Mindfulness All Souls Sangha are here. I'm delighted to see you all, and all of you. I also am a member of Shanti Deva Center here in New York City, and that's where I first met Tenzin through the classes she was offering there. I most recently took a conflict management training skills class with her, as well as managing emotions mindfully, and found that one of the classes so inspiring. I've now signed up for cultivating emotional balance for 12 weeks, and so it's really led me to benefit myself and others in many ways. So a little bit about Tenzin, and then we'll get started. Tenzin is a teacher of workshops and programs that bridge the worlds of Buddhist thought, contemplative practice, mental and emotional cultivation, and the latest research in the field of positive psychology. She's especially interested in bringing the wisdom of Buddhism into modern culture and into alignment with our modern cultural values, such as racial and gender justice and environmental awareness. She feels very strongly that a genuine and meaningful spiritual path includes not only our own work, our own personal transformation, but also the social and cultural transformation She first became interested in meditation in the 70s and started practicing in 1991 while she was in India and Nepal, and has completed several long meditation retreats. And this led her to monastic ordination in 2004 with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. She practiced as a monastic for almost 20 years, and she has been teaching in Buddhist centers since 2006 and also taught in prisons for 15 years. So I'm so grateful that you're here today, and I'm so looking forward to what you have to teach me about reclaiming joy. You've taught me so much already. Thank you so much, Tenzin.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for that lovely introduction, and welcome to all of you here. Really great to see. I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new friends too, so I'm really looking forward to our time together. As Pamela said, we've only got an hour, so we will make the most of it. I will be talking a little bit about kind of my own personal story, my own journey towards reclaiming joy, some of the challenges, some of the things I've learned about joy from Buddhism and other sources. I know not everyone on the call is Buddhist by any means, but Buddhism has some beautiful things to say about joy that we can all learn from. Then I want to guide you through a brief contemplation, a meditation practice. Then we'll open up for a little bit of discussion and questions. My talk today is being translated also into Portuguese and Russian. So thank you to Gianni and Nana, my brilliant translators who are doing it simultaneously. So I'll try to speak kind of slowly so that they can keep up with the translation. We'll also, when we get to the point of questions, we'll also pause to see if there's any questions that need to be translated back into English for me, and take some time for that. So for those of you that are on the translation channels, do not fear. We know you're there, and we will make time for you as well. So I want to start first with just a little bit of a personal story, maybe a little bit of my own kind of struggles and ongoing journey to reclaiming joy. I chose that title. For me, it's still a little aspirational. I'm not an expert by any means, but I've learned a little bit, with trying and failing and having various things. So I just want to share a little bit with all of you in what I've learned from Buddhism, some beautiful ways to reconnect to joy. And so I think my journey, I started meditating as a hippie teenager in the early 70s, and then encountered Tibetan Buddhism in the early 90s, and just felt originally completely overjoyed, felt like I had found just this hidden treasure that made life make sense, that was the key to everything, that kind of gave me a worldview that made everything make sense. And then, because I have a very extreme personality, just plunged myself right into study and practice wholeheartedly. And then over the years, really, engaged so deeply. And it was only like many years into practice that a very dear friend gave me a reflection. It's always your best friends that tell you the things that it's hardest to hear and are brave enough to know that it's not going to end the relationship. And she said to me very kindly at one point, and she kind of said, honey, it just doesn't feel that your practice is very joyful. Doesn't feel that it's bringing you that much joy. And I realized my practice was full of a lot of striving and pushing and effortfully trying to transform kind of desperately. And she was absolutely right, but I hadn't really realized how joyless my spiritual path had become until she offered that reflection. And I remember feeling so shocked and kind of embarrassed, but I knew she loved me and she said it so kindly. And so I thought, wow, okay, I really need to take a look at what's going on here. I don't want the rest of my life to be joyless, spiritual striving and pushing in this way and in this manner. And so what I found from my own experience, and some of you may share some of my experiences, I saw that I was coming from this culture in North America. We talk a lot about what we call the Protestant work ethic. And I know, some Europeans share this as well. Just this sort of idea that you need to be, I think it really informs capitalism, and they coexist in many places. Just this idea that you have to be productive, working all the time, making your life meaningful by productivity, by working, and so forth. And then I saw also, and it's called the Protestant work ethic for a reason. And I do a lot of interfaith work. And I was talking to one of my friends who's a Christian pastor, and he kind of pointed me to the influence of a French theologian called John Calvin. And he said, oh, that's a very Calvinist view. He said that spirituality means pushing and striving, and joy is kind of suspect, right? If you're really happy and joyous, you're not being virtuous. Being virtuous means kind of this pushing, striving mind. And I saw that even though I didn't grow up in a strongly Christian family, I had sort of absorbed this ethic right through the atmosphere. And I want to share my screen. I want to share a quote that I think really exemplifies this, a quote by John Calvin. And this is just one of many, and not to disrespect Christianity at all, but I think we get very distorted with these ideas. He said, the only consolation which mitigates and even sweetens the bitterness of the cross and of all afflictions is the conviction that we are happy in the midst of miseries, for our patience is blessed by the Lord and will soon be followed by a happy result. Those who would follow Christ must learn the philosophy of placing their happiness beyond the world and above the affections of the flesh. Okay, so this says it all. Now, in Buddhism, we value the patience. We have a whole genre of teachings all about making hardship the path. But I think ideas like this make us suspicious of any kind of worldly happiness, right? The only true happiness, the only happiness worth having is the happiness of heaven, the happiness of the next life. And so we just bear up miserably in this life to get heaven in the next life. Wow, I saw how much that had influenced my Buddhist practice also. This idea that I had just kind of gotten from my culture. And then there were some things in Buddhism that I think through this cultural lens, I was interpreting in a certain way, maybe even misinterpreting. And some of them I think are common misinterpretations. We're stuck in Buddhism with this terrible word in English, and I think it has the same meaning in the other languages. I talked to my Portuguese translator about this a couple of weeks ago. Renunciation. What a horrible, terrible, it's a bad translation for one. And then the feeling of the word renunciation. One of my friends who's a Buddhist teacher describes it so beautifully. He says, the word renunciation makes us feel like nuns in cold convents in Northern Europe in the Middle Ages, eating bread and water and punishing themselves if they have a lustful thought, right? Doesn't that give the image of renunciation? You're not allowed to have any fun. Joy is suspect. And then we're told in Buddhism, that's the first step of the path is renunciation. So, oh boy, we're finished from the outset because we have to have renunciation. So again, it just really intensifies this idea that having anything, enjoying anything is really not spiritual, which we get from Calvinism. And the reason I hate this word, it's a really bad translation. There's a Tibetan word that's translated as renunciation that literally translates as definite emergence. So the definition of that is the wish to definitely get free of our suffering cyclic existence. So that has a completely different feel. That has this liberatory, joyful feel. Oh, get free. So the only thing that we're renouncing is suffering and the causes of suffering, which sounds like a really good idea. We're not renouncing chocolate and nice walks on the beach. We're renouncing suffering and the causes of suffering. So this definite emergence, the mind of definite emergence, gets translated as renunciation, which gives a whole different subjective feeling. And so again, I know in Portuguese, the word is very similar. I'm not sure about Russian, the other languages, but that's the feeling. So that idea in Buddhism, plus another bad translation of the Four Noble Truths that we hear a lot. Oh, the Buddha said life is suffering. Well, just to be clear, the Buddha never said life is suffering. That is not the First Noble Truth. What the Buddha said is, as long as we're still subject to karma and delusions, there is the potential for suffering. But when you hear things like life is suffering, then you're very suspicious of any moment of joy you have. And I've heard Buddhist students say this. Oh, it felt like that was fun, but it must not have been because the Buddha said life is suffering. Oh, I thought dinner last night was delicious, but I guess not, because the Buddha said life is suffering. So just to be clear, if anyone translates the First Noble Truth as life is suffering, please correct them, because it makes us even more, suffer even more than we do, because we are suspicious of any moment of happiness at all, right? So that's one thing. And then also, I have been in teachings where I have heard, don't waste even 1 second of your precious human rebirth, which I didn't interpret as just savor every moment, just be present in every moment, just bring your awareness to every moment. But I thought it meant just produce as much as possible these virtuous actions, say your mantra 24 hours a day. Otherwise, you're wasting your precious human rebirth. So I think this whole bundle of both my own cultural messages, plus that misinterpretation of what Buddhism was saying about suffering and happiness and things like renunciation. But, I noticed I would sort of show up and, meet with my teachers with this energy, because it's very dispiriting to have this joyless energy. So I'd, go meet with my teachers and I'd be like, oh, Rinpoche, I'm like trying so hard. And they'd be like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? Why are you so miserable? Right. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama would just show up to every event, kind of bursting with joy. So I'm like, okay, something's wrong. I'm getting it wrong here somehow, right? I just noticed that I wasn't embodying what my teachers were embodying. So I decided to delve into, okay, wait, what is this? And I knew that joy was more than what psychologists sometimes called hedonic happiness, which is just happiness that comes from enjoying sensory pleasures. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I knew when I experienced what I called joy, it was something deeper than that. It was something that felt more fulfilling than that. So I wanted to investigate a little bit more, because again, I felt that there was something off with my approach and with my practice, and just comparing myself to my teachers. There's also a very personal piece to this too. I think there was my culture, there was my kind of interpreting Buddhism through my own cultural lens. And also, to be honest, I think it was me trying to be someone different than who I was, striving and pushing so hard to transform. Because to be honest, I didn't like myself very much. I didn't accept myself very much. And I saw this promise in Buddhism to transform into a being, with compassion and wisdom and kindness. And I was inspired by that. And all of that is great. But part of my inspiration, too, was avoiding some of the aspects of myself that I didn't accept very well. So all of that kind of went into this joyless, period of my spiritual practice. One of the beautiful things I found, and one of my favorite books and teachings, is The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by the Indian Master Shantideva. And in that teaching, he explains in detail these practices of a bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva is a being who has committed themselves to attaining full awakening for the benefit of others, for the benefit of themselves and for the benefit of others. It's this incredible, noble intention. And then the practices of a bodhisattva are listed as these 6 practices. And right in the middle of the list and energizing all of the rest of them is this quality of, sometimes translated enthusiasm, sometimes translated as joyous effort. So it's this idea of energy or enthusiasm, but this joyful energy. And so it's found right in the middle of the list of the 6 perfections because it's seen as necessary for our spiritual practice. Like I said, I had such a felt sense of discouragement and low energy without connecting to the joy that I thought, okay, what does Master Shantideva say in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life about this quality of enthusiasm? The Sanskrit word virya literally means energy. So how does my practice become energized? And the definition of this quality is taking joy in virtue, taking joy in doing good things, taking joy in our spiritual practice. And I thought, I don't have much of that. How do I get it? What do I do? So I want to share my screen again and a couple of verses. There's a whole chapter of Master Shantideva's beautiful text devoted to this quality. And it's chapter 7, so the enthusiasm chapter. And so I want to share some of the ideas from this chapter. And partway through the chapter, Master Shantideva says, the army for the sake of accomplishing the welfare of sentient beings are interest or aspiration, steadfastness, joy, and relinquishment or rest. And so he says, these are the 4 powers. They're sometimes called the 4 powers. And they're sort of sequential. So if we want to benefit beings, because we're talking about the welfare of sentient beings, so the whole bodhisattva path, so this shows how we kind of energize our entire spiritual path. First, interest or aspiration. We have to want it. Obviously, that's first, right? So at first, we aspire, oh, I really want to do these practices. I want to benefit others. I want to figure out how to do that. And then steadfastness. And that means knowing that our practice is not going to transform us instantaneously. It's not a quick fix. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm like telling you all something that's incredibly disappointing, but you're not going to be enlightened by next Tuesday unless you've been working at it already for a very long time. In the Buddhist context, we say many lifetimes, but it just means not giving up, not being so thrown off by the ups and downs of our spiritual life. Steadfastness, joy. So taking joy in our efforts to benefit others, in our spiritual practice, in our transformative, contemplative life and practices, and then relinquishment or rest. And one of my teachers, when I was studying this text, told me something that was such a key. He said, the reason these 4 powers are presented in this way is when we lose our joy, that's when we need to rest. So if we lose our joy, if we're doing our practice out of a sense of obligation, maybe a little resentfully, maybe feeling like we have to or we should be doing the thing to benefit others, he said, just stop. Not forever, but temporarily until you get that joyous energy back. And this to me has been this incredible key. And it's actually given me permission to rest when I feel I really need to, instead of pushing on. Because often what we do when we hear don't waste a second of our precious human rebirth and things like that, we just don't give ourselves any breaks at all. We push and push and push and push. In the secular world, there's a lot of conversation these days about burnout, right? A lot of people in, for example, healthcare industry, education, are experiencing massive proportions of burnout. I think especially since the COVID, experience. And we can experience that same kind of burnout in our own spiritual path. But if we know to rest just temporarily, and Master Shantideva's text says that, until we get our energy back and then go back and continue benefiting beings. And the qualities of this joy in the next verse, just like those who desire the pleasurable result of play, this bodhisattva adhered to whatever task they may do. They are not satiated by it. It makes them happy. So the quality of this joy is exactly the pleasurable result of play. It says it right here in this verse, this wonderful kind of energized, joyful quality that we bring to benefiting others, not this dutiful, resentful, burned out energy. And I think those of us who have been helped by someone by that energy, don't you feel like it's okay? You just go take care of yourself. Maybe you need a nap, like just, go rest. We don't even want to be helped by someone who's burned out and resentful, do we? So of course, we don't want to bring that energy to our own work to help others. And then I love this sort of metaphor. Thus, in order to complete this task, I shall engage in it just as an elephant tormented at midday enters into a lake. So you get this idea of this elephant that's just hot and just plunges into a lake. Like this is the kind of energy, that enthusiasm that we should bring into our work to benefit others. So I love those quotes from Master Shantideva, but this idea that it's helped me so much in my own path, this idea that using joy as we talk in chemistry about a litmus test to test the acidity of a solution. We dip the litmus test in to just see how we're doing. Use joy as our own personal litmus test for our spiritual life, right? And our spiritual practice and our work to benefit others. And when we found we've lost the joy, then we need to rest. And whatever that looks like for you, and find out what that thing is. For a lot of people, it's connecting to others. For a lot of people, it has something to do with nature, to connecting to kind of being in nature, whatever that is for you, to get that energy back. And we'll do a practice in a minute where I'm going to invite you to think about the kind of things that bring you joy. So I love that teaching by Master Shantideva. And then another piece from Buddhism that I love comes from what a teaching we usually call in the Tibetan tradition, the four immeasurables, also known as the four Brahma Viharas. And so those are spiritual qualities that we work on developing. They are loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And I just want to give a shout out here for equanimity. Dr. Joey Weber is going to be giving a talk on equanimity tomorrow, same time, same station. I just did a 6-week class with Dr. Joey that was so amazing on the quality of equanimity, which is sometimes one of the four measurables we don't think about much, we don't give as much attention to. loving kindness and compassion feel more juicy, empathetic joy. But I really recommend the equanimity talk. I might say a little bit more about that. But empathetic joy. And so what we say is that's taking delight in others' happiness and taking delight in others' virtuous actions, also taking delight in our own joy and our own virtuous actions. So we're not leaving ourselves out either. And that's such a source of energizing joy, is this empathetic joy. There's an American psychologist, his name is Jonathan Haidt, and he's coined a word for a specific enjoyable emotion he calls elevation. And he says it's the specific enjoyable emotion we get when we witness an unexpected act of kindness. So for me, that really relates to empathetic joy. Like you see someone in public doing some kind action, right? And the way that we feel, oh, that's so amazing that that person did that. So having empathetic joy towards others' happiness and towards others' virtue and others' spiritual lives. You hear that a friend of yours is going on retreat for 2 weeks. Oh, that's awesome. You're so excited. We say that empathetic joy is the opposite of jealousy and envy, which we sometimes feel with others' good fortune also, as if joy were some sort of limited quantity of stuff in the universe. And if somebody else has more, we have less. Doesn't work that way. Kindness and compassion don't work that way either, by the way. It's sort of it's kind of like fusion. It just replicates more of itself, the more of it that we generate somehow. Maybe that's a bad metaphor. I'm not quite sure. But, it's kind of infinitely generatable. And the more of this empathetic joy that we spread around, the more we have. It also has this beautiful relationship to compassion, because the kind of joy I'm talking about also includes and doesn't exclude an awareness of suffering. Because sometimes the question comes up, you're talking a lot about joy, but how do we have this kind of joy in the face of all that's going on right now in the world, in the face of all the political turmoil, the climate crisis, and so forth? So there's an interesting relationship between empathetic joy and compassion. And compassion requires us to have an awareness of suffering. That's one of the things that can be challenging about compassion. It requires an awareness of suffering, right? Because we say that compassion is a response to suffering and a wish to alleviate the suffering. And when we're talking about the 4 immeasurables, we say that each one of them has a way of getting completely kind of off base with our practice. And if we don't adjust our compassion practice well, it can lead to despair. That kind of relates to the burnout I was talking about before. With our compassion practice, if we don't balance our practice well, it can lead to despair. And it's interesting, the antidote to this despair is empathetic joy, because in every situation of suffering, there's also something in that situation that is something we can rejoice about too, right? You think of people surviving a natural disaster. And then when you start to feel overwhelmed by that, maybe you see it on the news, you feel so overwhelmed. And then you see, oh, but they're helping each other. They're all helping each other, or they're rescuing each other, some heroic moment of rescue. And that gives you that sense of elevation and that energetic sense that helps to offset. Because one of the problems with that despair is it's the opposite of this kind of energy for our practice and our action and our engagement that I'm talking about, and can so often lead to discouragement. And then we just quit and give up. So joy, the opposite of joy, is not an awareness of suffering. We can have them both together in this very interesting way, this deep quality of joy that I'm talking about includes an awareness of all aspects of existence, right? So it's all aspects of things. It isn't just this, kind of hallucinated excitement and this sort of upbeat, like life has to be a Pepsi commercial all the time. That's not at all what I'm talking about. But it's this deep sense of meaningfulness, this deep sense of awareness and appreciation. So we can have that even in the face of suffering, even with the awareness of suffering, if we have that balance. And so what I'd like to do is just share with you, when we talk about rest, I really love, there's a movement in the United States in social justice activist circles called the nap ministry. And in this movement, they are talking about how joy and laughter and rest are the most anti-capitalist, anti-productive things that you can do. And I really like this. Anything that is pushing back against productivity and capitalism, I like quite a lot. So if we need any encouragement to practice the rest that Master Shantideva is talking about, I want to share two quotes with you. One is by the founder of the NAP ministry. Her name is Tricia Hersey. And she says, rest pushes back and disrupts a system that views human bodies as a tool for production and labor. It is a counter narrative. We know that we are not machines. We are divine. Capitalism was created on plantations during chattel slavery and is the same system that is driving the entire globe to exhaustion and a deep disconnection with our bodies and minds today. We are no longer divine human beings in the system and instead machines. This is metaphysical, spiritual, and political work. So I love this quote. So rest as a spiritual practice, I really advocate that. And for any evidence, you can quote both the founder of the NAP ministry and Master Shantideva. They're very much on the same page. And then another activist, Bronte Velez, says, we can ask ourselves, how will you be useless to capitalism today? So I offer that because some of us may relate to that as encouragement for being able to rest as a counter narrative and being useless to capitalism. So I want to guide you through just a brief contemplation, and then I'll open up for questions. I want to just guide you through investigating what gives you joy, and then we'll have a little taste of empathetic joy, thinking of another's joy and taking delight in that, just to have a little bit of a felt sense and experience of what I've been talking about. And then I'll share one more quote with you, and then we'll open up to questions. So we'll just be contemplating maybe about 7 minutes or so. I want to make this short so that we have time for questions and discussions. So I'll invite you to just get in a comfortable posture, and you can close your eyes if you want. I'm going to be just guiding you through with some phrases, just prompting you to think about the role of joy in your own life. So just taking a moment to settle and quiet your mind. And I want you to just take a moment and think of something in your life that brings you joy. And it could be something really simple, like walking your dog, or gardening, or dancing, or going for a walk. It doesn't have to be anything huge and complicated. Just thinking of something that gives you joy, even if you don't get to do it very often. And as you bring that memory to mind, think of a time that you did that activity, whatever it was that brought you joy. And just feel yourself in that moment. Feel the peace and feel the opening. Feel that state of mind. Just recollecting that moment. And it might feel very peaceful. Joy doesn't have to be exuberant or excited. It can be a quiet joy, kind of quiet happiness or gentle contentment. And as you sit with that memory, I invite you to repeat these phrases. May my joy and my happiness increase. See if you can send yourself that heartfelt wish. May my joy and my happiness increase. May my joy and my happiness increase. So we can be joyful at any time, even in the midst of all the turmoil around us, political and social. There's this feeling of joy that we can tap into. May my joy and my happiness increase. And now I'm going to guide you into another aspect of this meditation to expand your joy. And this is that empathetic joy, having joy when others experience it. So now I invite you to think about someone you know now in your life who's having a great experience and bring this person to mind. Maybe it's a friend who's called you recently and said, all these great things are happening to me. I'm so happy. Or you see them and they just look joyful and they're living their best life. Bring someone like that to mind. And as you think of them in their joy, I invite you to repeat phrases again. This time, may your joy and happiness increase. So sending them the wish that their joy and happiness increase, and notice how it feels to send that wish. We might have an idea that there's a limited amount. If someone else gets some, that we get less. Just notice that with compassion. But see if it feels possible to send them a wish. May your joy and happiness increase. We often have this idea that there's not enough to go around, but thinking of joy as infinite, there's no end. May your joy and happiness increase. And this has been just a brief contemplation, but just taking a moment to really feel what that generation of joy for your own happiness and that generation of joy for others feels like in your body. Just notice the feelings in your body, whatever sensations might be present, whatever thoughts there might be in your mind. Just take a moment to come out of meditation. Ah. So I have one more beautiful quote that I'd love to share, but I think I'll share that as a way of wrapping our session up. We've got about 15 minutes, and I'll invite you now if you have a question or a reflection or a comment. I think let's see, for the people, you may have written some in the chat, and we'll ask for a moment for the translators to see if there are any questions that have come up. So yeah, just open it up. And how do we want to do this, Pamela? Do you want to help questions, or?
Sure, I'll be happy to.
Okay, if there was anything I haven't been able to read in the chat, so there may be some that have come in the chat. You can also raise your hand. Great, I see that Harry's got his hand raised. Are there any from the chat before I call on Harry?
None that I could read in English.
Okay.
So we'll have to rely on the translators if there are. I think there was something in Portuguese.
Is there a question in Portuguese, Shani? We'll ask. Okay. Yes. Ah, yes. That's so interesting that you said that. Was it Andrea? Oh, shoot. Well, Andrea. Okay. I just read the most interesting book by a researcher called Susan Cain, and the title of the book is Bittersweet. And so she talks about how we can have this interesting mixture of joy and sadness together. I think of the Portuguese word saudades, which kind of has this quality of, happiness and sweetness and kind of sadness mixed together. So this isn't uncommon at all. I think also when we are, we have an awareness of the suffering, we have an awareness of the transience. So sometimes even it's the feeling you'll get like, I get it sometimes watching children playing. And I'll go, okay, they're 4 years old today. It's not going to, all the things are going to change. So it's like a feeling of the transience and the appreciation and the joyfulness at the same time. So that's such a beautiful reflection. And I think that's very much can be our experience. And the English word bittersweet, I really recommend this book. It's very interesting. She goes into a whole exploration of that kind of a unique emotion that has joy in it. So like I said, joy doesn't have to be this excited, exuberant, running around yelling. It can be that kind of quiet, still bittersweet feeling that's got the joyful element to it also. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Harry.
Thank you so much, Tenzin, for your teaching. It was really quite wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
I was wondering if you could say something about how we rob ourselves of joy by comparing ourselves to others and comparing ourselves to illusory views of ourselves, and what we might do about it.
Yeah. Well, I think we have this thing. There's a psychologist and meditation teacher called Rick Hansen, and he talks about our negativity bias. We have this evolutionary negativity bias. And the way he explains it is our minds are like Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. And it had a function in our evolution. We needed to pay more attention to threats than opportunities, because as he also says, you can miss lunch any number of times, but you can only be lunch once. So our minds have a tendency to focus on the negative, but we can counteract that with training, right? And so I think what you're describing is very, very much our default mode of like, I'm not quite doing enough. It's not enough. I could be having more. I could, this thing isn't working. If there's 10 things in our life and 9 of them are working really well and one of them isn't, all of our energy goes towards the one that isn't. And most of us aren't living under that level of threat anymore. So it's not as functional as it used to be for just survival. I mean, some people still do have to pay attention to a lot of threats, but we exaggerate whatever it is that isn't working. So I think the practice is to balance things out, and appreciate more the things that are working, even if they tend to be subtle. Maybe you're not the rock star you always wanted to be your whole life, but what are the things in your life that are working? The positive psychologists that study human happiness have found out reliably and predictably that gratitude is one of the main sources of happiness. And that means sometimes gratitude towards even the little things that are going well. One of the things, shout out again to Dr. Joey, one of the things that I learned in the equanimity class was this idea of having equanimity towards the neutral things in our life, that we can actually savor and appreciate even the neutral. And he said this thing that really stuck with me. He said, otherwise we're living our life, mostly we're in the waiting room, like waiting for the good stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I'm spending my life in the waiting room, right? So how do we savor and bring that quality of appreciation and gratitude just to balance out our default negativity bias? So that's what comes up for me in response to what you said, Harry. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, awesome.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
Helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I can't see everybody on the screen, so if you can raise your little virtual hand by going to the reactions button at the bottom, or if there's any other questions that need to be translated, we can hear from our interpreters. Okay, thank you. Donna, is there anything in Russian? No, okay. Anything else? Wait another. Wow, all completely clear. Ruth, thank you.
Hi, thank you for all of this. It's wonderful. It's a very obscure question.
Okay.
But it's in relationship to laughter and capitalism. And okay, so do you think the planet Earth, do you think us people on this planet will ever not use money? Because I think, okay, this is the silly part, because like Star Trek, they have no money in this. So anyway, so that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, it's interesting. I interviewed, I have a podcast and a radio show, and I interviewed somebody the other day who's written another book I'd love to recommend. It's called Luminous Darkness. Her name's Deborah Eden Tull. She's a Zen teacher, and she wrote this book called Luminous Darkness that reminded me very much of Bittersweet, this idea of we can't push away the things that we label negative. They're all part of the spiritual path also. And in it, she quoted this thing that I never heard. And she said, it's easier for people to imagine the end of the world before they can imagine the end of capitalism. Isn't that amazing? So I think we live in a global market. I don't think that's going to change. I think it runs on something that acts like money. And clearly, for the climate crisis, we live in a closed system. Infinite growth isn't possible. So the sort of capitalist paradigm of increasing infinitely our gross domestic product in every country increases. It's not possible. But I think, currency is our means of exchange. But can we be responsible about it? I don't think we'll ever maybe eliminate it. And I think that's really interesting that we can't imagine the end of capitalism, but we can imagine the end of the world. But we definitely need, much more responsible solutions, even if we keep using something like currency for global exchange. Does that help?
Yeah, I definitely, I figured, if I got rid of money for at least a day in the whole wide world, I'm going to keep that dream.
There you go. You are able to imagine the end of capitalism, at least for 24 hours.
Thank you.
Yeah, Roxy. Hey, Roxy.
Hi, Tenzin. What an amazing class again. I was just picturing in my mind the bright smiles of teachers like you and Sangha, members now maybe departed, like Lama Yeshe, and trying to imagine how that joy was generated through, it seems like through, probably joyous effort, like you say, but I'm wondering about relinquishment as well. Like if you give up, like I think of what the last speaker was just talking about with capitalism and currency, and I'm thinking about social capital as currency as well, like the way in which we're competing for social status. And I imagine that happens within the Sangha as well, but how, like if we give up our need for praise, and if we just kind of stop being as competitive, maybe just relinquishment, like what's the role of, I can feel that little machine of joy energizing me today, what you're saying, but what's the role also of giving up needs? I know. Yeah. Okay.
That's another couple of hours at least to unpack, Roxy. That's cool. We can do that. But, one thing I'll point to is a teaching in Buddhism we call the 8 worldly concerns. And so it's these 4 sets of dichotomy, and one is praise and blame. So we're seeking praise and wanting not to be blamed. We're seeking fame and trying to avoid infamy. We're seeking pleasure and trying to avoid pain. We're seeking gain and trying to avoid loss. So these 4 kind of pairs of dichotomies, and they're just seen, as the name suggests, as worldly concerns. And so we're motivated not to let those influence our behavior so much. I'll pull in another modality, and then I'll end with this, and then another quote. I teach the Cultivating Emotional Balance training, and in that we talk about hedonic happiness, and then there's a Greek word, eudaimonia. Don't worry about that. Sometimes we translate it as genuine well-being. So it's a deeper quality of well-being that we get, not from what we get from the world, but what we can give back to the world. So I think of it almost energetically. There's a certain happiness we get from sensory pleasures, from, like you mentioned, having our needs met. Of course, there are basic needs we definitely need to have met. We're not trying to get rid of any of those basic needs. But then there's a deeper, maybe more lasting sense of satisfaction that comes from, what do we offer back? Helping others, our acts of service. We all know what it feels like to benefit others. And so I think it's just experimenting with our own experience and go, wow, well, the chocolate cake was really good. That was great, pretty fleeting, but wow, I really helped that person, or I did that deep practice, or I offered the teaching, or whatever it may be. That was just such a qualitatively different level. So I think it's that we don't say there's anything wrong with the hedonic happiness. It's just the more we tune in to that deeper level, then it sort of substitutes for that narrative. And we go, oh, you know, I don't have to be so influenced by the pleasure, pain, the loss, gain. Not so important. A lot of people find with spiritual practice, they just naturally simplify their life. It's not this idea, oh, I have to give up all the good stuff, but they notice they naturally simplify. They're finding that things like buying a lot of possessions just doesn't do it for them anymore. So I think it's a natural progression. We don't have to push it and force it. I think it's a side effect of practice and just having that experience of that eudaimonia, that deeper sense of well-being. Does that help, Roxy? Okay, great. All right, we're 1 minute over, and I don't want to keep people too long, and I know there's some announcements, but in closing, as kind of a way of dedicating, I want to share one more slide and one more quote, which I've just found recently, which I find so beautiful. And this is a writer and cultural thinker that some of you may know. Her name's Maria Popova, and I just love this so much. She's so poetic. She says, and this is my kind of closing thoughts for you: choose joy. Choose it like a child chooses the shoe to put on the right foot, the crayon to paint a sky. Choose it at first consciously, effortfully, pressing against the weight of a world heavy with reasons for sorrow, restless with need for action. Feel the sorrow, take the action, but keep pressing the weight of joy against it all until it becomes mindless, automated, like gravity pulling the stream down its course, until it becomes an inner law of nature. Joy is not a function of a life free of friction and frustration, but a function of focus, an inner elevation by the fulcrum of choice. So I leave you with that, and thank you for the FDCW team, Victoria and Angela and the whole team. Thank you to Gianni and Nana for interpreting for me. And I think there might be some announcements at the end.
Thank you so much, Tenzin. And I just wanted to also thank everybody and invite those of you who are here to make a donation to FDCW on the website so they can continue to provide programs like this. I also wanted to refer back to Tenzin's Unlocking True Happiness, which is at unlockingtruehappiness.org, where you can find her teaching schedule and her podcasts, and just mention that she has a teaching coming up tomorrow on Beyond Fear. And I thought, well, you could pop right from Joey's session to Tenzin's session, should you have.
It's actually not tomorrow. It's
oh,
not
I'm sorry.
tomorrow.
When is it?
It's November 29th.
Ah, my mistake. So I looked up your upcoming teachings so I could share them with everyone, but please just go to the website, Unlocking True Happiness, and you'll find her upcoming teachings. And please join us again at this summit, which continues through the week with lots of beautiful teachers. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Very
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you, Chogkyi, and a big hug from Brazil.
Spasibo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.